What if everything you've been told about becoming a millionaire is backwards? For decades, we've been sold a familiar story. If you want to become wealthy, you need a better job, a bigger salary, a lucky investment, the perfect business idea, or perhaps you simply need to work harder than everyone else. It sounds reasonable. After all, money creates wealth, doesn't it? Yet every year, millions of hardworking people follow that exact formula and still find themselves trapped in the same financial cycle. They earn more, spend more, upgrade more, stress more, then repeat it all over again. Meanwhile, somewhere else in the world, another person quietly follows a completely different path. Their salary isn't extraordinary. They don't appear on magazine covers. They don't drive the newest luxury car. They aren't constantly posting signs of success online. In fact, if you pass them on the street, you might never guess they were financially independent. Yet over time, they become millionaires. Not because they discovered a secret investment, not because they were unusually gifted, and certainly not because life was easier for them. The difference was something almost nobody noticed. Their habits. Not dramatic habits, not glamorous habits, invisible ones. The kind of decisions that happen quietly day after day, year after year, until they eventually reshape an entire financial future. And that's what makes wealth so fascinating. From the outside, people often notice the destination. Very few ever notice the journey, because the journey rarely looks exciting. There are no headlines announcing that someone decided to invest instead of upgrade. No applause for choosing a modest lifestyle. No awards for saying, "Not yet," when everyone else says, "I deserve this." Yet these ordinary moments quietly determine extraordinary outcomes. Think about an iceberg floating in the ocean. Only a small fraction rises above the surface. The rest remains hidden beneath the water. Most people only see the visible success, the expensive home, the investment portfolio, the financial freedom, the confidence. But beneath every lasting fortune lies something far larger. Thousands of invisible choices, thousands of ordinary habits, thousands of moments when someone decided to prioritize tomorrow over today. And perhaps that's why becoming wealthy often feels mysterious. We're constantly shown the result, rarely the process. Imagine walking through a bookstore. Entire shelves promise to reveal the secret to becoming rich. Some claim it's waking up at 5 in the morning. Others insist it's reading a certain number of books every year. Some argue it's positive thinking. Others credit discipline alone. But what if none of those habits are actually the starting point? What if becoming wealthy isn't about copying what millionaires do, but understanding how they think? Because every habit begins with a belief. Every decision begins with a perspective. Every financial action begins with an identity. Long before someone becomes a millionaire financially, they often become one psychologically. That idea may sound surprising, but modern behavioral science has repeatedly demonstrated something remarkable. Human beings don't consistently act according to their goals. They act according to their identity. Someone who sees themselves as healthy naturally makes healthier decisions. Someone who identifies as an athlete trains differently than someone simply trying to lose weight. And someone who begins seeing themselves as an owner gradually starts making completely different financial decisions without forcing them, without relying on endless motivation, without waiting until they feel ready. Because identity quietly changes behavior, and behavior, repeated consistently, changes everything else. This is where many people unknowingly make one of the biggest mistakes of their financial lives. They believe becoming wealthy begins after they make more money. So they postpone the habits that actually create wealth. I'll invest when I earn more. I'll start saving after my next promotion. I'll think about assets once I'm making 6 figures. The problem is that wealth rarely begins with more money. It begins with different decisions. And those decisions can happen at almost any income level. History offers countless examples. Teachers who retired as millionaires through decades of disciplined investing. Immigrants who built businesses from almost nothing. Employees who quietly accumulated ownership while their peers accumulated liabilities. None of these stories began with extraordinary wealth. They began with ordinary habits repeated over extraordinary periods of time, which raises an uncomfortable question. If the habits were always available, why don't more people practice them? The answer has very little to do with intelligence. It has even less to do with luck. Instead, it reveals something about human nature itself. Our brains are wired to chase immediate rewards. We naturally notice what's visible, what's exciting, what's socially rewarding. Buying something today feels real. Investing for 30 years feels abstract. Receiving compliments for a luxury purchase feels immediate. Quietly building an investment portfolio often feels invisible. One decision feeds the ego, the other feeds the future. And because the future is difficult to imagine, most people unconsciously choose today. Not because they're irresponsible, because they're human. But the people who eventually build extraordinary wealth learn to think differently. They train themselves to see what others overlook. They begin noticing the invisible consequences behind every visible decision. Every purchase, every investment, every habit, every opportunity. They stop asking, "What I want today?" and begin asking something much more powerful. What kind of life am I quietly building? That single question transforms everything. Because wealth is rarely created by one extraordinary decision. It's created by thousands of ordinary ones. And that's exactly where our journey begins. Because before millionaires build extraordinary fortunes, they first build extraordinary ways of thinking. And those ways of thinking lead to the first hidden habit that almost nobody talks about. It has nothing to do with money, yet it influences every dollar they'll ever earn. They stop chasing more income and start building better systems. And once you understand why, you'll never look at success the same way again. Imagine asking 100 people one simple question. What would you do if your income suddenly doubled tomorrow? Most answers would sound surprisingly similar. I'd buy a bigger house. I'd finally get my dream car. I'd travel more. I'd upgrade my lifestyle. Very few people would answer differently. I'd improve my financial system. At first, that response sounds almost disappointing. After all, becoming wealthy is supposed to feel exciting, dramatic, life-changing. But here's something remarkable that psychologists have discovered about human behavior. The people who create extraordinary results rarely rely on extraordinary moments. Instead, they rely on ordinary systems repeated with extraordinary consistency. This idea appears almost everywhere. Elite athletes don't become champions because they trained hard for 1 month. They become champions because they built routines they could sustain for years. World-class musicians don't perform brilliantly because they suddenly felt inspired. They perform brilliantly because their practice became automatic long before they stepped onto the stage. And wealth works in exactly the same way. The public sees the millionaire. They don't see the system that quietly created them. Most people spend years chasing financial motivation. They wait until they feel ready to save. They promise themselves they'll start investing after the next raise. They believe discipline arrives once circumstances improve. But motivation is unreliable. Some days it's powerful. Other days it disappears completely. Millionaires understand something different. If success depends on motivation, success becomes unpredictable. If success depends on systems, progress becomes almost inevitable. Think about brushing your teeth. You probably don't wake up every morning filled with excitement to brush them. You don't watch motivational videos first. You don't negotiate with yourself. You simply do it because it's become part of who you are. Now imagine if investing worked the same way. Not something you occasionally remembered. Not something you did only when markets looked exciting, but something automatic. A fixed percentage of every paycheck quietly flowing into investments before you even had time to spend it. That's not motivation. That's a system. And systems quietly outperform motivation almost every time. This explains why two people with identical incomes often experience completely different financial futures. The first depends on self-control every month. The second depends on a system that removes unnecessary decisions. Behavioral economists call this reducing decision fatigue. Every decision consumes mental energy. Should I save this month? Should I invest? Should I buy this? Should I wait? Should I spend? The more decisions your brain must make, the more likely it becomes to choose the easiest option, immediate gratification. But when good financial behavior becomes automatic, those decisions disappear. Saving becomes normal. Investing becomes expected. Ownership becomes routine. The brain stops fighting itself, and that changes everything. James Clear, author of Atomic Habits, describes this beautifully. He argues that every action you take is a vote for the kind of person you believe yourself to be. That idea extends far beyond health or productivity. It applies directly to money. Every time someone invests before spending, they're casting a vote. Every time they choose ownership over impulse. Another vote. Every time they delay unnecessary consumption. Another vote. Individually, these votes seem insignificant. Collectively, they create identity. And identity is astonishingly powerful. Because once someone genuinely begins seeing themselves as an investor, they stop asking questions like, "Can I afford this?" Instead, they begin asking, "Does this decision fit the life I'm trying to build?" Notice the difference. One question focuses on today's purchase. The other focuses on tomorrow's identity. That subtle shift completely transforms financial behavior. Let's return to two familiar characters, Daniel and Alex. Both continue receiving promotions. Both continue earning more. Daniel celebrates every increase in income by improving his lifestyle. New apartment, better car, luxury memberships, higher monthly expenses. Each decision feels reasonable. Each upgrade seems deserved. Yet something invisible is happening. Every new expense quietly becomes permanent. The promotion that once felt liberating slowly becomes necessary. His larger income creates larger obligations. Alex experiences the same promotions, but his response follows a different system. Whenever his salary increases, half of the raise immediately flows into investments. The other half improves his quality of life. He enjoys progress, but he never allows lifestyle growth to consume every financial opportunity. Notice what happened. Neither man worked harder. Neither discovered a magical investment. Neither suddenly became more intelligent. The difference wasn't effort. It was structure. One relied on emotion. The other relied on systems. Years later, the outcomes appear completely different. Not because of one extraordinary decision, because of thousands of ordinary ones. And this is where many people misunderstand wealthy individuals. They imagine millionaires possess extraordinary willpower. In reality, many have simply reduced the number of temptations they face. Automatic investing, limited debt, intentional spending, clear financial rules, instead of making hundreds of emotional decisions every month. Their systems make many of those decisions for them. The environment quietly shapes behavior. Psychologists have understood this for decades. Change the environment, and behavior often changes naturally. Consider supermarkets. Why are sweets often placed near the checkout? Because companies understand something about human psychology. The closer temptation becomes, the harder resistance feels. Now apply that same principle to money. If investing requires 10 complicated steps every month, you'll probably procrastinate. If investing happens automatically before your paycheck even reaches your spending account, the behavior becomes almost effortless. Millionaires don't eliminate human nature. They work with it. They recognize that discipline isn't about constantly resisting temptation. It's about designing a life where good decisions become easier than bad ones. This is one of the hidden reasons wealth compounds. Not only does money grow, good systems grow stronger too. Every successful month reinforces the next one. Confidence increases. Stress decreases. Decision-making improves. Small wins accumulate into powerful momentum. Eventually, financial discipline no longer feels like discipline. It simply feels normal. And perhaps that's the greatest transformation of all. Because the wealthiest people aren't constantly forcing themselves to behave differently. They've gradually become different people. But if better systems create better financial lives, what exactly should those systems be built around? Surprisingly, not budgeting, not saving, not even investing. It should be built around something much deeper. Ownership. Because the moment someone shifts from simply earning money to owning productive assets, their entire relationship with wealth begins to change. And that hidden habit may be the most important one of all. There's one question that quietly separates those who spend decades chasing money from those who eventually make money work for them. It isn't, asterisk, how much do you earn? Asterisk, it isn't, asterisk, how much have you saved? Asterisk, and surprisingly, it isn't even, asterisk, how much do you invest? Asterisk, the real question is much simpler. What do you own? Because ownership changes the relationship between you and money forever. Imagine waking up tomorrow morning. Before you've even had your first cup of coffee, money has already entered your account. Not because you clocked into work, not because your boss approved your paycheck, not because you worked overtime, but because something you own continued creating value while you slept. A business, a dividend-paying stock, a rental property, a book, a digital product, intellectual property, a share in a company halfway around the world. You weren't working, yet your assets were. This is one of the biggest psychological shifts self-made millionaires make. They stop asking, how can I earn more? And begin asking, how can I own more? At first, those questions sound almost identical, but over decades, they produce completely different lives. Let's return to Daniel and Alex. After 10 years, both men have continued receiving promotions. Both now earn impressive salaries. To anyone looking from the outside, their financial futures appear equally bright. Daniel celebrates every milestone by rewarding himself. A luxury SUV replaces the perfectly reliable car. The apartment becomes a larger home. Designer furniture fills every room. Premium subscriptions, exclusive memberships. Everything reflects success. Every purchase feels justified. After all, he earned it. His life becomes increasingly comfortable. But something else quietly becomes larger too. His obligations. Every upgrade demands another payment. Every payment demands another paycheck. Every paycheck demands another month at work. Without realizing it, Daniel has built a beautiful financial cage. The walls are expensive. The furniture is luxurious. The view is impressive, but it's still a cage. Now look at Alex. His salary increased too. He enjoys life. He travels. He spends money. He celebrates achievements. But every raise follows one simple rule. Ownership first. Lifestyle second. Asterisk, asterisk. Before buying anything new, he asked himself one question. Asterisk, can this money become an asset instead? Asterisk. Sometimes the answer is yes. Sometimes it isn't. But simply asking the question changes everything. Because every dollar now has competition. The latest smartphone isn't competing against last year's phone. It's competing against future investment returns. A luxury watch isn't competing against another watch. It's competing against future financial freedom. Suddenly, every purchase carries an invisible price tag. Not just what it costs today, but what it could have become tomorrow. Behavioral economists call this opportunity cost. It may be one of the most important financial concepts that schools rarely teach. Whenever you choose one option, you automatically give up another. Buying a luxury car doesn't only cost $50,000. It also costs decades of potential investment growth. The dividends, the compound returns, the ownership that never had the chance to exist. Those invisible costs rarely appear on receipts, but they appear very clearly 20 years later. This explains something that often confuses people. Why do some millionaires continue driving older cars long after they can easily afford luxury vehicles? It isn't because they dislike nice things. It isn't because they're obsessed with saving money. It's because they've trained themselves to see every purchase differently. The average consumer sees a car. The owner sees an alternative investment. The consumer asks, asterisk, can I afford it? Asterisk, the owner asks, asterisk, what will this cost me in future freedom? Asterisk, those are completely different conversations. This is also why many self-made millionaires appear surprisingly ordinary. Research has repeatedly found that a large percentage of millionaires don't live in the wealthiest neighborhoods. Many drive practical vehicles. Many avoid expensive designer brands. Some still shop with coupons. To outsiders, that behavior looks strange, almost contradictory. People assume that becoming wealthy means looking wealthy. But wealth and appearance often move in opposite directions, because the more energy someone spends maintaining an image, the less energy remains available to build ownership. Real ownership is surprisingly quiet. A stock certificate doesn't attract compliments. An index fund doesn't impress strangers. Business equity doesn't receive thousands of likes on social media. Rental income isn't glamorous. None of these things announce themselves, but they all quietly work, day after day, year after year, long after yesterday's luxury purchase has been forgotten. Think of wealth like planting an orchard. Imagine planting a single fruit tree. For years, nothing dramatic seems to happen. It grows slowly, patiently, almost invisibly. Now imagine planting another tree, then another, then another. A decade passes. What once looked like an empty field has become something extraordinary. Every season, the orchard produces more fruit, not because you're working harder, but because of work you completed years ago. Ownership behaves the same way. Every asset you acquire becomes another tree. Every investment becomes another seed. At first, progress feels almost invisible, but eventually, the assets begin supporting one another. The dividends purchase more shares. The shares produce more dividends. The business funds new opportunities. Cash flow creates additional ownership. The system begins feeding itself. This is why millionaires become increasingly difficult to catch financially. It's not simply because they own more. It's because what they own begins creating even more ownership. That is the quiet power of compounding. But ownership doesn't only change your bank account. It changes something much deeper. It changes how you think. When someone owns productive assets, patience becomes easier. Short-term market headlines become less frightening. Economic downturns begin looking like opportunities instead of disasters. Because owners think differently. They understand something consumers rarely notice. Time is often the greatest creator of wealth. Not excitement, not speed, not constant activity. Time. And once someone begins trusting time, their relationship with money transforms. They stop chasing quick wins. They stop obsessing over overnight success. They stop comparing themselves to everyone else. Instead, they quietly continue planting trees, knowing that one day, the orchard will speak for itself. But there is another habit shared by many self-made millionaires that receives almost no attention. In fact, it has nothing to do with investing, nothing to do with business, nothing to do with money itself. Yet it influences every financial decision they will ever make. They become fiercely protective of one resource that cannot be earned back once it's lost. Not money, not opportunity, attention. Because before money follows behavior, behavior follows attention. And in today's world, attention has become one of the most valuable assets anyone can own. Imagine waking up tomorrow morning. Before your feet even touch the floor, someone is already competing for your attention. You reach for your phone. A notification appears. A breaking news headline. An influencer showing off a luxury vacation. An advertisement for a watch you didn't know existed yesterday. A video promising to make you rich overnight. Within minutes, your brain has already processed hundreds of tiny messages. Buy this. Want that. Compare yourself. You're behind. Most people believe these moments are harmless. They're not. Because before anyone controls your wallet, they first have to capture your attention. And in today's economy, attention has become one of the most valuable commodities on earth. In fact, some of the world's largest companies don't actually sell products. They sell attention. Their business depends on keeping your eyes focused for just a little longer. Another swipe, another click, another video, another advertisement. Because every extra second creates another opportunity to influence a decision. This is where many self-made millionaires quietly behave differently. They don't merely protect their money. They protect the place where every financial decision begins. Their mind. Behavioral psychologists have studied something fascinating for decades. Human beings rarely make decisions in isolation. Our choices are heavily influenced by the environment surrounding us. Change the environment, and behavior often changes without us even noticing. Imagine walking into a casino. There are no clocks, very few windows, bright lights, pleasant sounds, free drinks. Every detail has been carefully designed to keep people playing longer. Now, imagine opening social media. Different platforms, same psychology. Every swipe introduces a new comparison. Someone bought a bigger house. Someone drives a more expensive car. Someone announces another six-figure month. Someone celebrates another luxury vacation. Your brain begins making comparisons automatically. Not because you chose to, because that's what the human brain evolved to do. Thousands of years ago, comparison helped our ancestors survive. It helped them understand where they stood within their tribe. Today, that same instinct is being activated hundreds of times every day. The tribe has simply become the internet. Here's what makes this dangerous. Your financial situation may not change at all. Yesterday, you were satisfied with your home. Today, after 20 minutes online, it suddenly feels too small. Yesterday, your car worked perfectly. Today, it somehow feels outdated. Nothing changed, except your perception. Psychologists call this reference point adaptation. Our happiness depends less on what we actually possess, and more on what we compare against. Companies understand this remarkably well. That's why luxury advertisements rarely discuss specifications. They rarely focus on practical benefits. Instead, they sell identity, status, recognition, belonging, freedom, success. They invite you to imagine becoming someone different simply by making a purchase. Because people don't buy products, they buy stories about themselves. And stories are far more persuasive than facts. Think about the last luxury watch advertisement you saw. Did it focus on the mechanics inside the watch? Probably not. Instead, it showed confidence, elegance, achievement, respect. The watch became a symbol, not of time, but of identity. The same pattern appears everywhere. Luxury cars, designer clothing, exclusive neighborhoods, premium technology, private clubs. Most of these purchases aren't solving practical problems. They're answering emotional questions. Asterisk, who am I? Asterisk, asterisk, how do other people see me? Asterisk, asterisk, do I belong? Asterisk, asterisk, am I successful? Asterisk, behavioral finance teaches us something uncomfortable. Money decisions are rarely just money decisions. They're emotional decisions wearing financial clothing. This explains why two people with identical incomes often spend money in completely different ways. One buys something because it increases status. The other buys something because it increases freedom. From the outside, both purchases look equally intentional. Inside the brain, they're driven by entirely different motivations. One seeks validation. The other seeks independence. And those motivations compound over decades. Self-made millionaires aren't immune to advertising. They're human too. They experience temptation, comparison, envy, desire, just like everyone else. The difference is that they've learned to question their attention. Whenever something suddenly feels urgent, they pause. Whenever they desperately want something, they ask why. Whenever everyone seems to be buying, they become more cautious. Because urgency is often manufactured. Scarcity is frequently artificial. Comparison is usually incomplete. They've learned that every company wants something. Your attention, your time, eventually, your money. That's why many wealthy individuals intentionally limit exposure to constant noise. Not because they're antisocial, because they understand something profound. Attention shapes thought. Thought shapes decisions. Decisions shape habits. Habits shape wealth. If someone controls the first step, they often influence everything that follows. Imagine your attention as a garden. Every day, seeds are planted. Some become ideas. Some become desires. Some become habits. Some eventually become financial decisions. The question isn't whether seeds are being planted. They always are. The real question is, who planted them? Was it you? Or someone hoping to sell you something? Millionaires understand that protecting attention isn't about avoiding technology. It's about becoming intentional, choosing what enters the mind, choosing who influences decisions, choosing which voices deserve space. Because every thought eventually becomes behavior, and every repeated behavior eventually becomes identity. There's another reason attention matters so much. It determines what you learn. Most people consume information passively. Entertainment, drama, celebrity gossip, constant news. Nothing wrong with relaxation. But imagine if just 30 minutes every day were invested differently. Reading about business, studying psychology, learning investing principles, understanding economics. Over 10 years, that small daily habit becomes thousands of hours of accumulated knowledge. Knowledge compounds just like money. So does wisdom. So does judgment. And perhaps most importantly, so does perspective. The greatest investors in history weren't simply lucky. They spent decades training how they think, because better thinking eventually produces better decisions. This leads to one of the most overlooked millionaire habits of all. They don't simply invest money. They invest attention, because whatever consistently receives your attention eventually receives your future. If your attention constantly flows toward consumption, consumption becomes your lifestyle. If your attention consistently flows toward ownership, ownership gradually becomes your identity. This isn't magic. It's psychology. And psychology quietly shapes wealth long before the bank account changes. But protecting attention alone isn't enough. Even with the best systems, even with the strongest mindset, one challenge still defeats millions of people. It's incredibly simple. It's completely human. And it's responsible for more financial failure than almost any investment mistake. The inability to wait. Because the greatest fortunes in history were rarely built through speed. They were built through patience. And that patience begins with one extraordinary habit that modern society makes increasingly difficult. Imagine two investors standing at the edge of the same journey. Both begin with the same amount of money. Both have access to the same opportunities. Both dream of financial freedom. 10 years later, one has built lasting wealth. The other is still chasing it. What separated them wasn't intelligence. It wasn't luck. It wasn't even income. It was patience. We live in a world that celebrates speed. Food arrives in minutes. Packages arrive overnight. Entertainment begins with a tap. Naturally, we start expecting wealth to work the same way. We want quick profits, rapid success, overnight transformations. But wealth has always followed a different clock. It rewards those who are willing to wait. Think about a farmer planting seeds. No matter how desperately he wants to harvest, pulling on the crops won't make them grow faster. The only option is to keep watering the field. Trust the process, and give time the opportunity to do what effort alone cannot. Money works the same way. The first few years rarely feel exciting. Investments grow slowly. Savings seem insignificant. Progress feels almost invisible. Many people mistake slow progress for no progress at all. So they abandon the plan just before it begins working in their favor. Self-made millionaires understand something different. They know that consistency often beats intensity. A single brilliant financial decision might help, but hundreds of ordinary decisions made over many years transform lives. That's why patience isn't passive. It's productive. Every month you continue investing. Every unnecessary purchase you avoid. Every skill you keep developing. You're giving tomorrow more opportunities than yesterday had. Eventually, something remarkable happens. The effort no longer feels like sacrifice. It becomes momentum. People watching from the outside suddenly describe your success as overnight. But you know better, because you remember the years when nothing seemed to be happening. Those quiet years weren't empty. They were building the foundation for everything that followed. And perhaps that's the greatest advantage patience offers. It allows ordinary people to achieve extraordinary results simply by refusing to quit. Because in wealth building, the biggest rewards rarely go to the fastest. They go to those who stay in the game long enough for time to become their greatest ally. But patience alone isn't enough. Because even patient people can make poor financial decisions if they're asking the wrong questions. And that's another habit that quietly separates self-made millionaires from everyone else. Every financial decision begins long before money leaves your account. It begins with a question. The problem is, most people never notice the question they're asking. Standing inside a store, browsing online, considering a major purchase, the first thought is usually, asterisk, can I afford it? Asterisk, it sounds responsible, but it isn't the question that builds wealth. Millionaires tend to ask something deeper. Asterisk, will this decision move me closer to freedom or further away from it? Asterisk, that single question changes everything. Suddenly, money is no longer just something to spend. It becomes something to direct. Every dollar receives an assignment to consume or to create. Imagine holding $100. In one future, it disappears the moment you spend it. In another, it becomes part of an investment that quietly grows for years. Neither choice is automatically right or wrong. The difference lies in whether the decision is intentional. This is one of the hidden shifts in millionaire psychology. They don't see money as a reward. They see it as a resource, a tool capable of producing more choices tomorrow. That's why they pause before making important financial decisions. Not because they're indecisive, because they've learned that emotion is often loudest in the first few moments. Time gives wisdom a chance to speak. Behavioral psychologists have found that simply creating a pause between impulse and action leads to better decisions in many areas of life. Money is no exception. Sometimes the most profitable decision you'll ever make is the purchase you decide not to make. Not because you couldn't afford it, because you chose a better future instead. Over years, those small moments begin to stack together. One thoughtful decision becomes another, then another, until intentional living no longer feels like effort. It becomes identity. And once your identity changes, your financial life begins changing with it. Millionaires don't have access to different hours in the day. They don't receive different versions of money. More often than not, they simply ask better questions before making ordinary decisions. And those questions quietly shape extraordinary lives. When you combine better questions with patience, something remarkable begins to happen. Your decisions stop working alone. They begin working together. And that's where the greatest force in wealth creation finally appears. Imagine planting two seeds. The first is dug up every week to check if it's growing. The second is left alone, watered consistently, and given time. Months later, only one has become a tree. Not because it received better soil, not because it was a different seed, but because someone trusted the process. Wealth works in much the same way. Most people dramatically overestimate what they can accomplish in a year and underestimate what disciplined habits can accomplish in 10. That's because the greatest force in wealth creation rarely feels dramatic. It feels boring. The first investment barely moves the needle. The first year of saving doesn't transform your life. The first business may produce almost no profit. The first book you read won't suddenly make you financially intelligent. Everything appears disappointingly small, and that's precisely where most people quit. Not because the strategy failed, but because the rewards arrived too slowly. Self-made millionaires understand something different. They don't chase immediate transformation. They trust gradual accumulation. Every investment adds another brick. Every skill adds another tool. Every lesson improves the next decision. Individually, none of these moments seem extraordinary. Collectively, they become unstoppable. This is the hidden power of compounding. Compounding isn't only something money does. Knowledge compounds. Discipline compounds. Relationships compound. Trust compounds. Your reputation compounds. Even your ability to recognize opportunities becomes sharper with experience. One thoughtful decision makes the next one easier. One good habit reinforces another. Eventually, progress begins accelerating. What once felt painfully slow suddenly appears effortless. People looking from the outside call it luck. They say everything just seemed to work out for them. But they weren't watching 10 years earlier. They didn't see the weekends spent learning instead of scrolling. They didn't see the investments made during uncertain markets. They didn't see the opportunities quietly accepted while everyone else was distracted. The success looked sudden. The preparation was anything but. Think of a snowball rolling down a mountain. At first, it barely grows. It moves slowly, almost imperceptibly. But as it continues, something remarkable happens. Every rotation gathers more snow. The larger it becomes, the faster it grows. Eventually, the snowball's momentum becomes impossible to ignore. That's how wealth often behaves. The early years build the foundation. The later years reveal the results. The greatest mistake isn't starting too late. It's stopping too soon. Because the people who become financially free aren't necessarily the smartest. They're often the ones who simply stayed consistent long enough for compounding to reveal its true power. And once you understand that, you stop chasing shortcuts. You start respecting time. Because time is the one partner every millionaire learns to work with. If you've noticed a pattern throughout this documentary, it's because there is one. We never really talked about becoming a millionaire. We talked about becoming the kind of person who naturally creates wealth. That's an important distinction. Most people spend years searching for better investments, better jobs, better opportunities. Millionaires begin somewhere much deeper. They build better habits, because habits shape identity, and identity shapes every financial decision that follows. Think back to everything we've explored. Ownership over consumption, systems over motivation, attention over distraction, patience over impulse, long-term thinking over short-term pleasure. None of these habits require extraordinary talent. None require a six-figure income. None depend on being born into wealth. They begin with small decisions. Decisions available to almost anyone. That's why wealth is less about a single breakthrough and more about a quiet transformation that happens over years. Long before someone becomes wealthy on paper, they've already become wealthy in the way they think. The money simply catches up. Perhaps that's the greatest myth we've challenged today. The belief that wealth begins in a bank account. It doesn't. It begins in the mind. Every choice you make today is quietly shaping the person you'll become tomorrow. Every unnecessary purchase strengthens one identity. Every thoughtful investment strengthens another. Every hour spent learning instead of consuming entertainment changes your future in ways you can't yet measure. These moments seem insignificant until one day you look back and realize they changed everything. The world celebrates dramatic success stories, but lasting wealth is rarely dramatic. It's built in ordinary mornings, ordinary paychecks, ordinary decisions, repeated so consistently that they eventually produce extraordinary results. That's why the hidden habits of millionaires remain hidden. Not because they're secret, because they're easy to overlook. They don't promise overnight riches. They don't create instant excitement. They simply work, day after day, year after year, until the gap between those who practice them and those who ignore them becomes impossible to miss. So, as this documentary comes to an end, don't ask yourself, how can I become a millionaire? Ask a better question. What habits can I start today that my future self will thank me for? Because the future isn't created by one extraordinary moment. It's created by thousands of ordinary ones. And the wealthiest people in the world understood that long before they ever became wealthy. The next time someone tells you that becoming wealthy is all about earning more, remember this. Income can open doors, but habits determine whether you walk through them. The hidden habits that create millionaires aren't reserved for a privileged few. They're available every single day in the choices you make, the attention you protect, the patience you practice, and the future you're quietly building. If you enjoyed this documentary and want more deep dives into the psychology of wealth, subscribe to the Wealth Lab. And if today's video changed the way you think about money, the next one will change the way you think about income. Watch next. Why building wealth has almost nothing to do with your income. Until then, keep building wealth by changing the way you think.